Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to March. Today is March 1st, 2023. I'm going to review my February 100-mile races. I had two. I had Rocky Raccoon 100-miler in Texas, and this past weekend I had Run Lovit 100-miler in Arkansas. So I thought it'd be a good idea to review them both. They were in the same month, not far apart. I talked a little bit about Rocky Raccoon in some of my fitness videos, but I'm going to go over it a little bit more so you understand what the race is about, and, and if you ever want to do the race, you'll know what to expect. So Rocky Raccoon takes place in Huntsville, Texas. It's about 3 hours from Austin, where I live. It's pretty convenient. I've run the race 3 times. The first time I just made it 100K, and second time I finished the 100-miler, and then this year I also finished. So going into the race, I wore my wool pants and some of my typical winter gear. I have a pre-race video if you're interested in details on what I wore for that race. Actually, for both races, please check out those pre-race videos. But my gear was a good choice. We're looking at 5 laps. I'll show you the map here. So it goes around the lake. So the start is here in the middle. It kind of loops around, goes all the way around. It's a 20-mile loop. So you're looking at 5 20-mile loops. What makes this race challenging is, there's some things that make it challenging, some things that make it pretty good for a entry-level 100-miler. Challenges are, it can be very cold, especially at night, and during the day it can be very hot. Another challenge is because this course is fairly flat. I think it's about 6,000 feet of gain and loss on the course. People start running they take off too fast in the race and they wear themselves out. But if you pace yourself somewhat evenly, because you're going to degrade, and you can deal with the weather because you're looking at a cold start, hot during the day, and then at night it gets cold, and then if you finish the next morning, it's going to get hot again. And that's exactly what happened this year to me. So the first few laps were somewhat uneventful, but on the third lap, the heat started to affect me. And even though I'm a high heat runner, I live in Texas, the clothes that I had on were borderline whether or not I could wear them in that heat. But I did fine. For caffeine, I really upgraded my usage of caffeine this year in my hundreds. I'm using the goo. This is the Espresso Love. It's the flavor, but it has salt and caffeine. And I'm also using the Cliff Blocks, which I've talked about. I use some with caffeine, with not. And then I carry coffee packets, and that's really been critical to my success in my last few hundreds. I used caffeine before, but I'm using more now. And I find that I drink a lot of coffee all the time anyways, but upgrading the amount of caffeine has helped me a lot. So I struggled the third lap. The fourth lap was at night. It got cold again. I felt okay. I just tried to keep the time that I had banked. And then going into the fifth and final lap, I had a lot of the morning, which got very hot. And mentally, I was not doing so good. Mental strength is so important in finishing 100 milers. And at one point, I remember I was only 10 or 15 miles from the finish, but I was doing calculations, and I thought I was not going to make the 30-hour cutoff for the Western States qualifier. You actually have 32 hours to finish the race, but I needed sub 30 to qualify for Western States again, which is my 4th year qualifying. And it turns out that my math was all messed up because I got depressed about it, but I took out my hiking poles and I really pushed hard, and ended up finishing I really pushed hard the last 6 miles, because from the last aid station to the start finish line is about 6 miles. It's one of the longest segments, and it's a lot of single track. It's also got some exposed areas, so it was hot. But I really pushed really hard, and I really my spirits got better when I got to a point where I knew a certain turn was only a mile and a half from the finish. And I also started to realize that I was going to make the 30 hours. And I ended up finishing in 29 hours and 5 minutes. Um, if I wouldn't had gotten down on myself and spent extra time at the last aid station, I probably would have went sub 29. But this goes to show you that when you get tired and you start to hallucinate a little bit, and your mind can play games with you. Because I was only talking 5-6 miles. I don't know why I couldn't do the calculations, but in my mind I was way over the cutoff, but actually I wasn't. So Rocky Raccoon went well for me. I think also due to the fact that I've run it 3 times, I knew what to expect. And then I had my why. You should always have your why you're running a certain race. And my why was I needed to qualify for Western States. Now I do have more races this year that could also qualify me, but I just wanted to get that out of the way. So I was happy, and I finished. The race beat me up pretty good because of the previous years it was kind of cold most of the race. There was a little bit of heat, but this year it was pretty rough because it went cold then hot, then cold then hot. And we're talking pretty big swings, 20, 30 degrees difference in temperature. So it was challenging. But that's it for Rocky Raccoon. It went well for me. I'll remove that. Now let's talk about Run Lovit, which was this last weekend. This is a race which takes place near Hot Springs, Arkansas, an area called Mount Ida, and Lake Ouachita National Forest. It's huge. It goes for hundreds of miles. You'll see when I pull up the map. Some very rural areas. I ran this race last year, and I made it to the 100K mark. What makes this race tough, at least it does for me, is it starts at night. I knew that going into this year. It's not an excuse, but I struggle with night races. I've done 100K that started at night. I finished it, and I know I had challenges in that race. Why is it a challenge for me? Because I get up 5 o'clock every day. Even this year, I went to sleep purposely at 8 o'clock thinking I will sleep late. I slept till 6 in the morning. I just can't sleep late. Just my culture or habit, whatever you want to call it. I'm a person that goes to sleep at 10:30 every night. So night races, and especially night races that are going to take me 30 to 34 hours. In this race, you get 34 hours. I was going to target 30 hours, but when you've been up all day and then you got to run 30 hours, it makes it pretty tough, especially on a very mountainous course like this. This course probably has 17,000 feet of elevation. I covered, I think, 9,065 miles. And the weather is awful. Usually, I think awful is a strong word, but it's just challenging beyond your imagination. Last year, it was cold, and then right after we pulled out of the race, it started sleeting on the runners. And it was the first time I ever got a slight case of hypothermia, and I was prepared for it. So going into this race, this year, I had extra gear. I changed to all craft kit, and things looked really promising because last year it was in the 30s. This year, they said a low of 40, high of 50. Okay, that's perfect conditions, okay? But as you know, the weather people, I don't know what it is about the weather business. If I ever meet a weather forecaster, I've got a lot of questions for them because the tolerance on what they're giving us is very big. I remember when my kids, it was supposed to snow in January, 4 days in a row, and no snow at all landed on the ground. But anyways, that's what happened in this race. It's supposed to be low of 40, high of 50 during the day. Perfect, right? No rain. It rained before. Well, it rained all night long, and the high was 40 or 41. It sure felt a lot colder than that, and very strong winds. We're talking probably 15-mile-an-hour winds at least. I don't have an exact number, but that's what it felt like. So the race started. Um, I got off to a good pace, ran up the Hickory Mountain, which is the first 4 miles. I'll bring up the map here. You can see this is a very mountainous area. So on the north of here is Lake Ouachita. So if you can see my mouse, I'm on the very top far left of the screen. That's the start finish. So you go out, you climb this Hickory Mountain, which is pretty much straight up, and you get to the first aid station around 4 miles. So you finished Hickory Mountain. I felt real good on that, and I ran it much faster than last year. I will say that the whole course I ran 1 hour faster. So I finished 65 miles, 100K. So I basically ran every mile a minute faster. So I did very well this year, but not well enough to continue to finish the race. And I'll go into that in more detail. So the race, after you get to this aid station, it goes out and goes all the way out along the lake. There's 3 aid stations in this segment. It goes all the way out to this far east. And then you take it all the way back. It's an out and back, all the way back up to that Hickory Mountain aid station. So when you make it, when you've gone that far, you've done 32 miles. Rolling hills, and this course, I don't know the number of water crossings, but it's got to be more than 25. And they were all higher than normal. There were no rocks to cross. So every time you crossed a water crossing, you were at least in a foot of water, so totally soaked. And the water was cold. You know, I've never experienced that before. I mean, last year I got my feet wet a couple times, but I was able to avoid the water. And as the race went on, I didn't care anymore because I crossed water so much. And surprisingly, my speed goats dried out really fast. I think the design is very good. I've got speed goat 5s, and my Injinji socks. Usually after only 100 yards, I felt like my feet weren't wet anymore. It was really bizarre. So what I learned from that is don't worry about the water. In the future, I'll just run down the trail. But you know, this first 30 miles, I mean, imagine running up hills and the trail is actually the stream. That's what it felt like. It was raining, but it wasn't raining real hard because it has in that area, it has a spruce and, you know, pine trees. So it's blocking the rain, but you know it's raining because it's getting to the ground. So you're not very wet. I mean, that wasn't a problem, but what was a problem is that the whole ground, and keep in mind that it's dark. And I've got a very powerful light. I was using my handheld, and then eventually I switched over to my new Black Diamond 700 series, which I'll be doing a review on. This thing worked really well for me. But beginning the race, I think the first 20 miles I used my Nathan handheld so I could really keep the light on the ground. And it's almost like black ice, you know, it's like a sheen on the ground. You're trying to pick up when, are we talking about a ½ inch of water? Or are we talking about enough water to post hole into the mud? And so for the first 10, 15 miles, I think I was always running on the edge of the trail thinking that I was going to keep my feet drier. That turns out, I mean, that lesson learned from that is just run down the center of the trail. That's what a lot of people are doing, and that's really the best way to do it. Because the trail shoes are really well designed well to drain. Your feet are just going to get wet. You're not going to avoid it. But that's what was going on. All the trails going uphill were actually a small stream. So it was kind of aggravating, you know. I tell myself, you know, during the middle of the night when it got cold and dealing with the rain all night, you're talking to yourself like, it's not supposed to rain. When is it going to stop? And it never stopped. I mean, it might stop for like 10, 15 minutes, but the trail is soaking and it's still running water. So you kind of play it. The mental strength game is tough in this race. There were many times where I was telling myself, you know, why am I doing this? You know, I remember even asking myself last year, you know, it's just such a tough course. And starting at night, you know, I knew the course. I remembered most of the course from last year, but dealing with the rain all night, and it was probably close to 40 degrees. I didn't feel too cold in the beginning of the race. I say the first 30, 35 miles because my pace was a little bit faster. And but my feet were, they were always wet. They didn't feel soaked, but they were wet. And then, after you leave Hickey Mountain, you jog down this mostly a fire road. It's actually a nice part of the course because it's mostly downhill and it's on a fire road. So you're not getting beat up by all the rocks and roots on the trails. And then you get to a point where there's this jog. You can see this part of the course that goes down. Well, it's a place called Pipe Springs. And this little section here that goes down is like 2.5 miles. And it's like the longest 2.5 miles of your life. It's called Charlton. And you have to do that section twice. Once on the way out and once on the way back. And you're going up, you're climbing the first probably 1.5 miles up this trail that's narrow. And, it's 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning by that time. So you're a little bit, at least for me, my eyes are a little bit hazy. Even though I got lights and I'm loaded with caffeine, I'm kicking rocks, getting aggravated a little bit because my toes hurt. I keep kicking rocks. I keep telling myself, pick up your feet, you know better. But, when you're in an ultra and you get past 30 miles, your feet just don't pick up like they used to. But anyways, you get up this ridge and then you go down to the ridge. You're kind of excited when you get to the top of the ridge because down there's a pretty nice aid station on the bottom here called Charlton. But when you get to the top of the ridge, it's like this trail snakes back and forth. You can't hardly see it here. I can't really blow it up. But it snakes back and forth, and there's some very dangerous exposure going down the trail. So you got to be very careful. And it's raining. It won't stop raining. And the trail is 1.5 feet wide, maybe. And if I fall off to the left, I'm going to slide down that mountain for probably 50 to 100 feet. So I have to be very careful. I have my hiking poles out. Made it all the way down there. Got some food. That's an excellent aid station. I would say that about the whole race. The race director and the aid station is top notch. It's a really tough course, aggravating course. But it's beautiful during the day, but you just can't see it at night. You just know what's there. Some of these sections is probably good that it's at night. It'd probably scare you if you saw what you're going through. This Charlton section, I think most people, except for the pros, always run it at night because when you come back, it's going to be dark too. But there's a lot of exposure on this little section here. So made it back up. Then you cross the street, you cross the Jeep Road at Pipe Springs again. And then I'm going north here. You can see, I don't know if you see my mouse, but I'm going towards the lake to Crystal Springs. And when you get to Crystal Springs, there's just a ton of water crossings. And some of them were 2 feet, 2.5 feet deep in some places, pretty rough water. You had to find the right place to cross. But like I said before, I no longer was caring about stepping on rocks because in most cases there weren't any. I just ran across the stream. I've learned that's a lesson for future races too, that it's not going to affect me very much. I'm not kidding. I crossed at least 25 streams and got my feet wet. And then a lot of times I was post-holing in the mud. But the nice thing was you cross a stream and then your shoes would be completely washed again. But I did get some rocks. I didn't wear gaiters with my speed goats because, wearing gaiters with Hokas is always the trouble. There are some people that make gaiters for them, but I don't know. It's nothing like ultras. That's one plus about ultras is their gaiter system is so excellent. But usually it doesn't cause me an issue because the throat of the shoe is so tight. I almost never get rocks in my speed goats, but there should be an asterisk on that. When you submerge your foot in water, all kinds of shit are going to go in your shoe. And that's what happened. I was getting like little sticks and rocks and sand was getting into my shoe because I don't think gators would have stopped it anyways, because I was submerging my foot in a river or stream, I guess you would call them. They're more like creeks and streams. There weren't really any rivers. Anyways, kept going, made it to Crystal Springs, which is a big checkpoint. And I made the previous cutoffs, but I should have said Hickory Mountain. After 32 miles, I had about 3 hours I had a cutoff, or 2.5 hours. That's really good. and made it to Crystal Springs, looked pretty good. And then you start getting over here into one of the roughest sections of the course, and this long line here is called Bear Mountain. It's a mountain ridge which is 7 miles long, and it goes up and down. It's kind of like a mountain bike type trail. At that point, you've done almost 50 miles, so or in the high 40s, so you're pretty beat up. It rained the whole time across that mountain, and it got really cold. I think it got cold because the wind exposure off the lake effect, because you're right above the lake. And it was early morning. It was probably 6, 7 in the morning. And so all the variables made it cold, plus I was running slower, so I felt colder, and it took forever to get across there. And then once I got across there, I knew my legs were really, my feet felt like they had a lot of blisters on them. But at the end of the race, what turned out was they were just white. You know how you like when you get waterlogged, the skin gets very white. That happened to me once before, Arkansas Traveler, when I was in rain all day long. It was surprising. After all those river crossing and post holing all day for 21 hours, I didn't get any blisters. That's we using Injinji socks and Hoka Speed Goat 5s. I did have a blood blister on the front of one of my toes just from kicking rocks, but my feet were solid white on the bottom, but I didn't have any blisters. Now, it felt like I had some blisters, but I didn't. That's what turned out. But my legs were just really beat up, really heavy. So made it to this aid station here. After Bear Mountain. And at that point, I knew that I was only going to finish 200K. To get credit for 100K, one cool thing this race director is just him and his wife are awesome, and they do a great job of the race. And they tell you before the race even starts that if you make it to the 100K, they will change your registration to 100K and give you a 100K finish. I don't know any race directors that will do that except for these people, and him and his wife are just awesome. I think they do that because they know how hard the race is, and they want you to leave with something. But the nice thing is you get a 100K finish, you get a 100K buckle, and it shows up on Ultra Sign Up as a 100K finish, even though you paid for a 100-miler. So it's really, really nice of them to do that. But at this point, I knew that I was at the same situation as last year, even though I had a lot better time, because when I made it to the 100K spot last year, I was almost at cutoff. When I made it to 100K at the dam, the cutoff, it's about 65 miles actually. Once you make it to the dam, you can drop out of the race and get the 100K credit. I was more than an hour ahead of cutoff, so if I wouldn't have, dragged my ass so much on Bear Mountain, I could have made it to cutoff, 2 hours ahead. I had 2.5 hours, and if my feet, not my feet, but my legs felt a little bit better, I might have been able to, keep going. But my body, I've done enough of these hundreds. I knew my body. I'm gonna turn off the map. I've done enough of these hundreds to know that my body, I could have probably gone a little bit further, but I don't. I give myself maybe 5% chance of making the 82-mile cutoff, which was 9 p.m. And I didn't want to go through that aggravating weather for another 3 or 4 hours to try to make that cutoff. Because if I could have made the 82-mile cutoff, then that's the last cutoff. If you can get past that, they will let you finish the race. If you don't make 34 hours, they'll give you a buckle, but they won't give you an official finish. But I really thought that I could not keep up the pace enough to meet the cutoff. And my mental strength was not good enough. The rain and maybe being up so long, I didn't really feel tired, but I'd been up 30 hours already. Because I finished in 21 hours and I'd been up, at least 30 hours. I didn't feel tired, but my body just was not going to have it. My legs were feeling very heavy, maybe just lactic acid just built up was way too much. And I wasn't sure about my feet, but it turns out my feet were fine. But I just didn't have time. they tell you in this race that actually both Arkansas races are masters level races, and they don't mean that by age. They mean that by difficulty. And it's very true. Arkansas Traveler took me 2 times to finish. And this one, I don't think I'm going to go back. There's just too many races I want to finish. But um, I did improve quite a bit the previous year, but I just don't have the ability to finish Lovit 100 yet. Maybe after a few years, but I'm just not fast enough. There's only 50 runners in this race, and most of them are much faster than me. And this race has got my number. I did it quite a bit faster this year, but still, I really need to be into that cutoff maybe 2 or 3 hours ahead of 2 or 3 hours ahead of cutoff to make the finish in this race, in my opinion, because I know how my body degrades in the last 30 miles. Another great learning from this race was, and it will help me in my next race, is all of my skiing that I do. I did ski marathon. I got a ski ERG in my garage. It's really helped me build up my traps and my strength for using my trekking poles. In this race, I probably used my trekking poles 35 miles. That's the longest I've ever used them. Before, maybe 10, 15 miles. In my next race, which is Cruel Jewel, which is the toughest ultra, one of the toughest ultras in the U.S., it's in May, so I have a couple months to train for it. I'm going to do a video about my training for that one, but in that race, I might be using my trekking poles the whole race. So I'm very, very happy how it went using my trekking poles, because I'm not kidding. I used my trekking poles maybe 35 miles, and the next day I didn't feel any soreness at all. So your traps and your shoulders and everything, such big muscles, and it really can take a big beating. So that was very promising. So I really plan to expand my use of my ski machine, especially going into the Cruel Jewel, which is 36,000, I think 34 or 36,000 feet of elevation. That's in northern Georgia. Stay tuned. I'm going to do a video on that in the next couple of days to kick off my Cruel Jewel training block. But I was happy with my performance at Lovit, even though I didn't finish the 100-miler. So that's my learnings. That's what happened. One thing I didn't say about Lovit is during the middle of the night, the fog was so strong that it was like being in a cloud. Felt like you were in the clouds. And I could literally only see a few feet in front of me. So we're doing with that, the cold weather and the rain. It was really challenging. So, no excuses. I knew what I was getting into. Lovit has never had good weather. We thought we were getting a dream when we saw it was going to be 40 to 50 with no rain, but turns out that didn't happen. The weatherman let us down, but I'm glad I was prepared. That's another learning. I saw some elite runners running in shorts and a tank top, and it was in the low 40s and rain, and they were really cold. And some of them, I think, dropped out at the next aid station after Bear Mountain, so they didn't get anything out of it. But always be prepared for really bad weather. There was an ultra in China where like 20-some people died because a storm came in. It mainly killed the elite pack. You got to carry out in this race. I brought out my emergency Solomon jacket twice, and I was prepared for the race. You always need to be prepared, because either one, the forecast can be wrong, which we know that happens most of the time, or a storm can just come out of the middle of nowhere, especially in the mountains, and really make things very challenging for you. And in a point-to-point race like this one, you could be a long ways away from help if needed. So always be prepared for bad weather. I hope everybody's having a great week. Welcome to March, and wish the best in your training endeavors. Bye for now.